Drums of War, Chapter 5, Terms, Part 1. On the white flagstone paths of Refusal Plaza, St. Augustine, Florida, Terra. Senator Ethan Robert still couldn't look on the senatorial dome without feeling awe, capped with a shining bronze spire. Its gentle stone, half-spherical curve terminating in band and carved reliefs depicting scenes from the Corporation Wars and the Founding War in vertical span of 60 feet, all held aloft by forests of gracefully fluted, classical marble columns, thick and tall as redwoods of the old Cali. Its sheer size was a statement of not only the Republic of Terra and her aligned planet's might, but also her vigil, or rather, the vigil of her citizens over her and one another. Not only was the structure beautiful and imposing, but it required constant maintenance to keep the swamps or seas of Florida from swallowing it whole. Senator Robert thought that was an apt metaphor for corruption. One must keep the constant watch over oneself, or be dragged to the depths and drown. Senator Robert did not feel like an important elected official as he walked between the columns and beneath the shadow of the dome. He felt small and overburdened by duty and responsibility, and that, he supposed, was the point of the place. On a day like this, that feeling was more salient than usual. There was a question of weight before the Senate and Congress. He kept his spine straight, however. He had chosen to pick up this duty. He had no cause to complain just because it was heavy. The question was just how to square the facts of the matter with the circle of the Republican policy. The facts were that the Dominion was a genocidal slave-holding society, that they were an interstellar nation, were aggressively expansionistic and hostile. However, the facts were also that the entire population was enslaved, that there were hundreds of billions of people in said population at least, and the home worlds whose wholly unsuitable for habitation without its massive support network of other planets. Another important fact was that total war had already been authorized against the Exarch Dominion. Senator Robert had played a key role in securing that authorization, and despite knowing to his bones that it was the only correct option, it did not sit well with him. The reason being what came after. Strike one, the confinement of the whole remaining hostile Xenos population on their homeworld for a span of 3 generations. Squaring that circle was always going to present some tough choices. And he knew it when he made the arguments on the floor, just like he knew total war was inevitable. He knew an intractable belligerent when he saw one. None of that meant that he had to like it, or his duty and the role in it. This was why he was more resigned to see the senior senator from Terra striding towards him with her ears laid back, her tail lashing, her yellow eyes narrow, and her claws on the end of her short fingers extended and retracting as if anticipating a fight. Roberts, Senior Maeve McGregor, began, obviously full of righteous fury. However, Senator Roberts interrupted her. Robert, there is no S in the end of my name, Senator McGregor. It's Robert. She showed him her contact teeth. Well, Robert, I hear you're losing your resolve, going soft on the Xenos, the same ones who wiped 3 colonies and glassed a planet. I do not believe that you're in a position to question my resolve, madame. Now, I would like to actually be present for the debates. So, if you would please. Senator McGregor ostentatiously rolled her eyes and stepped aside so Senator Robert could continue on his way, and she fell in step beside him, saying, You said it yourself, it's war, people die. Might as well be them and not us. Senator Robert cast his mind back to another crisis and another conflict decades ago, to the station in a decaying orbit around the gas giant, to the sound of venting Atmo over his mics, to the sight of what one person could do to another, to what he did to stop it, and to the innocent people he wasn't in time to help. He let that memory touch his voice and told her, You have no idea what you're talking about. To her credit, she did not quail at the sudden ice in his voice. She did, however, consider her words a trifle more carefully. I know more about war than I ever wanted to, but I represent Terra herself, so I can't look away. I trust men like you when you talk about what needs to be done. Senator Robert interrupted her again to ask, Only men? I am a woman, she answered wryly, and I know women can't be trusted. Not even you, except for me, she huffed primly before continuing seriously. The point is, I believed you when you said total war was needed to properly fight this enemy, And now I hear that you want to change your mind just because the fighting got ugly. Strike one has to apply, Senator Roberts said quickly. The question is, how? How? We put them on ships and ship them to their homeworld. Senator Roberts waved a hand and said, It just isn't reasonable. I think the security of the Republic and her allies is worth the cost. Or did you forget that the dynasticals might not recover? Senator Robert couldn't stop the grin from tugging at the corners of his mouth as he said, Cost isn't the issue. It's space. Space? They won't all fit on one planet. That, and what is the Republic policy when we find slaves? We free them and help them find their feet, of course. And so we put all of the slaves on their homeworld and just tell them you're free but not allowed to leave. Good luck. Senator McGregor glared at the shadows between the columns as they neared one of the many doors leading to the building's interior. Damn, she said. Why can't things just be simple? He agreed. Damn. Some hours later, Senator Roberts was in his seat listening to yet another proposal that seemed to go too far in some ways, and not far enough in others. The idea of absorbing the greater part of the enslaved population of the Dominion seemed like a particularly bad idea, since the good senator from Hope, the third one, had apparently forgotten that the warriors were all just as enslaved as anybody else in that twisted mockery of a civilization. That and flat-out execution of the majority of the aristocracy ignored the fact that those people had been raised to function in the way that they did, and were more like favored slaves than actual rulers. Even the emperor was enslaved, and to be fair, the poor bastard would probably appreciate being put out of his misery if the intel briefings were accurate. He didn't expect that one to go anywhere, but at least she managed to scrape something like an idea together. That was more than he could save for himself. Senator Robert caught Senator Malek Saber's eye from across the room, and they shared a moment of mutual suffering. Damn, he hoped the man had figured something out. He settled in to listen to another proposal. In orbit over Terra, Gideon was overwhelmed. The wonder, terror, amazement, gratitude, confusion, awe, and sorrow might have been enough for a young boy to grapple with singly, but not all at once. The past 4 weeks had been a whirlwind of chaos, destruction, salvation, and mighty wonders. It began, of course, when the Great One of Peter George called upon his brethren to punish the acolyte lords and those who stood beside and above them. They rained from the sky in burning stars and unleashed fury and death upon the warriors commanded by the acolyte lords and their masters when they came crashing to the ground. Yet still, all the while, the Great One Peter George did protect and safeguard him, though he was crippled, and put the Great One at great risk. Even when the Great One Peter George was forced to flee the falling building from which he was fighting, he sacrificed a weapon of great power to instead carry Gideon away from the danger. From then until they were trapped together in the dark by collapsed tunnels was a blur. He himself, yet unharmed, saved his already broken leg, and the Great One Peter George pinned beneath a chunk of rubble too heavy even for his mighty armor to lift. However, the fear that the source of water might dry up, or the Great One perish despite his pained efforts to fetch water for him grew until it filled the whole of his mind. Until the arrival of the Great One Emily Sullivan. She and the 4 other Great Ones of the vengeful Goddess Republic had been sent to safeguard the lives of both the Great One Peter George and himself. This was only the beginning of wonder beyond his ken. The might and power of the Terrans was far greater than to kill even those who stood high. He knew already that their healing arts were mighty, but he did not comprehend that what the Great One Sam Reed had done for his leg in weeks before the arrival of their brethren. The cast and the magic white tablets were the least of their might. They spoke not his tongue, as the Great One Peter George and his shadow warrior brethren had. Yet they had a device with the power to make him understand them. It was strange to hear the voice say something in inscrutable words of power, and at the same time for the device to speak words his mind might hold. Stranger still was that the device was mute when he spoke, yet the Great Ones in long white coats and soft blue garb understood as he spoke anyway. Wondrous power indeed, but this was the least of the power. They had used this power to explain that they could cause him to fall into a sleep in which he would be unaware of his body, and in the sleep they would cut into his leg and perform repairs to his bones. More wondrous still was that they had asked one such as he whether he should permit them to do such a thing. the wonders ceased not there, for he had in those of panic and pain, upon meeting the Great One Emily Sullivan, that he wished not to become separated from the Great One Peter George until he could be assured that he shall become whole once more. She had said that it would be so, and even those great ones who stood above her made it so. They used a word which even the great power could not make into the one his mind could hold. The device instead used the phrase, "Say to do this thing without fail," even when the great one stood silent to await it finishing. They had been in beds, soft, warm, comfortable beds, befitting a priest-master or perhaps one of the imperial family, next to each other in the vast ship in which the great ones in the long white coats plied their mighty powers. Gideon had only heard of such a ship either taking warriors away to kill those deemed unworthy, or arriving with things to be put on their ships to be taken elsewhere. The sons and daughters of the vengeful goddess Republic had been described to him as fearsome warriors, to be brought beneath the service of Exur. May the stars, no, may the stars not tremble at his steps. May the stars burn in the fury as his crimes and cry out in vengeful goddess Republic. He had spoken much to the Great One Peter George about such things as duty, choice, and how one may live as those great ones in the white coats plied their arts such that he could walk once more. He hoped their power would fail not, for it was he who the Great One had taken at such an injury to protect, unworthy as he was. Wonders upon wonders, for the Great One Peter George had asked him, he, a mere serf and cripple, who had not even the courage to face his destiny upon the altar. "I think my people shall have victory over those. What should we do with your people?" This was difficult, even before they were confined to beds beside one another. The Great One Peter George had asked him difficult questions and expected answers. But this was far greater than he could possibly answer. "I know not," he had answered, knowing it would not satisfy. "Yes, you do. Nobody but you knows what you think." This had been a favored refrain of the Great One Peter George, and each time he had said it, it had been so. Therefore, Gideon searched his thoughts. "It is my thought that your people are great and powerful, and that all that I and my people knew must change in the face of this power. You have spoken to me about life where I choose which pathway my feet follow, with no fear of knife or lash. And though those who teach among us would call it blasphemy, my heart's long for this. Would you be willing to speak these thoughts to those who lead among my people?" The Great One had asked him. It had taken a long time and many repetitions for Gideon to answer. This, all of this, and the fact that he stood with aid of a crutch in waiting for the transport vehicle to the planet down below, was what had overwhelmed him. He found himself wishing that the Great One Peter George could be beside him, and not under the arts of the great ones in the long white coats. How should he dare speak before those with the might to command one such as the Great One Peter George? Just as he'd shown Gideon great kindness did not mean that all were as the Great One Peter George in heart. Even so, he recalled the words of the Great One Peter George. "If you cannot quiet your fear, then gather your courage and do what is well anyway." End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.